Thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak in this audience, which is, I think, my first time actually speaking for the BCS. I was given this from computer games, you know, these things, amulet of power. And the job of this amulet is to make this camera follow me. It actually works. I'm really impressed by that. I'm tempted to drop my talk and just... But okay, I think you're waiting for the talk, not for this camera. So my talk is about information as the currency of life. I will try to explain to you what I mean by that. I will try to explain to you what I mean by information, what I mean by saying currency, and what I mean by what is relevant for life in this context. So before I start, I would like to mention a lot of people who have contributed to this research, and the list is actually longer, but I mentioned only those who have most directly influenced this work or contributed. I'm using work from the papers, joint papers, and many, many other things. So this is just a short list of the people involved in the topic, and there are, of course, other groups doing related work, which also should be mentioned ideally, but the time is so limited that I will move on. Some of the names will reappear on the slides, as you will see. So we'll start with a prelude and ask the question, origins of intelligence. Where does intelligence come from? We know it does not come from politics usually, but there are other places where it comes from. We want to study that. And Richard Feynman has this really nice motto, which I subscribe to, namely, what I cannot create, I cannot understand. That's a very interesting motto. It basically is a little bit different from the pure natural sciences where you observe, you experiment, but you essentially don't build a system. We are in computer science, and in computer science we build systems. That's our main occupation. And so in the topic of artificial life, people have asked the question, can we build something that is kind of alive? More precisely, Chris Langton put it in this fantastic way, can we imagine other forms of life as it could be? We know life essentially as carbon-based life that exists in the universe, and people always look for carbon, compounds, substances, DNA, and so on in the universe when you look at spectral images. But the question is, can life look different? Could there other forms of life exist? Could their life be on silicon, living just as electrons in your computer? Is that a sensible way? Is a sensible way of defining life in a different way? And Chris Langton was one of the people who formulated that. The field of artificial life now is already getting mature. It is started in 1987. It sounds almost old. Well, it's 25 years old almost. And this question, of course, is still very much open, but lots of research has happened in this direction. And the goal of this field is, of course, to ask origins of life. Where does life come from in real life, or what are the minimal conditions on a physics of some hypothetical universe to create life? A little bit more concrete, what are the principles of life and evolution? There are some principles are known, but many principles are still being researched. And a little bit more specific and actually more relevant to people who do artificial intelligence is the question, how do organisms acquire cognition on their own? Well, they don't acquire it on their own, but evolution gives them this acquisition of cognition. So how does that work? Is that something that works reliably, or are we just lucky? It's all a fluke of our particular line of evolution. Very, very lucky, and just, well, another run of the universe will not give that. Okay, that is a very important question. The other question that I would like to mention is, well, how do you do that? Well, what people do a lot, they simulate and construct lifelike systems that look like they are alive or imitate certain aspects of living systems like ant colonies, like neural networks, genetic algorithms for evolution, and many more. But the things that we are interested in studying are slightly different here in our group. It's actually about finding principles. We are saying we don't care ant colonies, neural networks, genetic algorithms. They are just expression of a more general phenomenon. The question is, can we formulate this phenomenon? Can we say more precisely what we mean by principles that guide organismic behavior without resorting to the mechanisms by which they happen to happen? Now, I want to have a fictitious dialogue of a person which we call Mr. Simple. We could call him also a bit less politely, but Mr. Simple is a very simple person, said, well, but you solved all the problems. Darwin solved all the problems because evolution just does it. Evolution just selects the right organisms that will survive, and with that, everything is explained. Well, instead of evolution, I could say Albus Dumbledore creates that. It's not an explanation. Selection of the fittest or a selection of the survivors is not a sufficient explanation. And I'll talk to you why. Darwin actually was much more careful about how he formulated things. So he says, oh, well, exactly, no. I have to say, I don't explain origin of life. Darwin is very clear about that. He talks about the origin of species, not of life. And he understands that. He's very aware of that. Second, he does not actually talk why cognition and intelligence emerge and can emerge. That's not clear at all, and he doesn't actually talk about that. So the question is, can we get away without cognition and intelligence? And yes, we can. A sponge, let's call him SpongeBob. I'm happy. I don't need a brain. It's perfectly fine to evolve to a sponge and no further. I get there, and there's no way to evolve further. It's quite possible. You could have, for example, a pocket calculator. You know, like the simplest pocket calculators. They're made out of wood, and you have to turn some things, and that's about what you can get, and you cannot get further. The fact that we have computers whose power is getting further and further and really allows us to approach brain-like structures, that is not a given. It just happens to be the case. It's interesting that it happens, but it is not self-understood. It doesn't have to be this way. Right? So the question, I will call a $1 million question. No, I prefer £1 million question. Or actually it's a million-year question, or a 4 billion year question actually. Why a brain? Why do we have a brain? What is it good for? Now I'm going not actually to talk a lot about brains today, but I want to keep you in mind that this is the question that I have in the backside of my brain, namely, why do I have cognition? Why can we actually climb up the ladder of cognition? So let's have a look at that. I would like to move to the next part, the march of intelligence. Sarabande, for those who don't know, it's a very slow Baroque dance. It's very slow and very posh. Only the kings did that. So we are marching towards intelligence, hopefully. And the questions we are running is, what drives the evolution of intelligence? I mentioned that. Now the second thing is why it's successful. It's consistently successful. It works quite reliably. It's not just that humans happen to be really lucky, being really intelligent, all the animals are dumb. It's not true. Animals are quite intelligent. The other thing is why so far, why do we get actually to the human level? Humans are animals that can predict things that will happen millions of years. Not everything, of course. Not everything is predictable that far, but some things we can predict. For example, that the Andromeda Nebula is going to move at some location. That's a pretty good prediction. If you look at a bacterium, probably it needs a predictive horizon of 20 minutes. If you look at plants, they need to plan ahead for several weeks. When there was this really strong winter, hard winter this year, I saw my garden sitting there thinking, shall we bloom? Nah. It's not going to be warm anytime soon. Felt really like they're sitting there and making a guess, shall we bloom? Nah, probably not. We know intelligence appears in different lines of descent. We find it here and there and there and there in different locations. We find it in bees. Well, bees are not super intelligent. They will not solve your IQ problem, but they can discover and remember patterns. They know shortest routes. They do a lot of things. The strange thing is that the same principles reappear with different hardware. I will give you an example later on. So you have like an iPhone and a Samsung mobile. The hardware looks entirely different. At least we assume so. But the function is the same. That's strange. How does nature do that? And we know that mammals are intelligent, of course, but that could be just a fluke. Birds are intelligent. You could say, well, they're very closely related to mammals. But the octopus is my favorite animal because this guy is really intelligent. It can use tools. It can do a lot of things. It has a very powerful manipulation. But its closest relatives is not exactly ones he wants to show himself with. They are mussels and snails, not exactly famed for their intelligence. But then mussels and snails, they don't have to do much. They sit there and don't do anything. If you don't do anything, you don't need much intelligence. If you're an octopus, however, you have 8 arms to control, and they have to move fast, and they have, you know, there's lots to control. So you have lots to control, you have big intelligence, you don't have much to control, you don't worry about it. Okay? Well, the conclusion is, we would like to argue that fortuitous evolutionary accidents are not enough to explain the emergence of intelligence. And now the question is, can we find things that give us a trace of what makes intelligent evolution happen? And we'll start a little bit on the bottom of the pile, really on the pile, the intelligence that came in from the trash. I'm afraid to say, yes, it's a bit disgusting, but these are really fascinating animals. Next time when you kill them, think before you do that. I mean, you probably still do that, but they are actually quite fascinating animals, highly optimized. The mean housefly. The common housefly is an absolutely fascinating animal, highly optimized to its niche, and very, very successful. They basically don't learn anything through life. They are evolved to perfection. Well, of what they are doing, of course. Let's find out why. So let's look at the world in the view of a human. So we are the human, that's me, right? And there's a fly. That's what he's doing. That's there's a wall, there's a table, there's food on the table, and there's a pile outside. I'm not going to say what the pile is made of. Never mind. But that's how I, as a human, classify the world. However, the fly classifies it like that. It basically classified what can I do with it. On the wall I can sit. On the table I can sit. There's food, I can eat it. On the pile I can eat and I can sit. And on the human I can eat and I can sit. No surprise that the human is a little bit disgusted, but that's the way it is. So there are 2 things that the fly is interested in here. There are probably a few more, but not much. Fly has a really simple view of the world. But why is it important? Because it tells us something about how the fly wants to distinguish the world. It doesn't care about, you know, you have your newest iPhone here. The iPhone is completely indifferent. The fly is completely indifferent to it. It really depends whether the iPhone is smeared with a good, well, butter or something to food. Then the iPhone becomes interesting. So that's what the fly is interested in. And the question whether it can sit. And we're going to look at this sitting procedure. So we have the fly, and the most prominent thing about the fly, except for the wings, of course, are the eyes. And this is not by mistake. So you could ask the following question, or the fly baby could ask, Grandma, why dost thou have such big eyes? And the response is, so that I can better compute the optical flow. Okay, I have to explain what the optical flow is. So the optical flow, the eyes of the fly, as you see, they're compound eyes. They are not built to resolve objects. Because the fly, as we said, doesn't care about exact objects. But what it cares about is how it can sit somewhere. And so what they measure is actually velocity. Let's have a look here. Let's assume the fly is moving over a surface, and it's moving fast into this direction. And basically, the surface has structure. So there's a texture. It's like a carpet, so you see it moving. Now, objects that are far away don't move very fast in the vision of the eye, of the fly eye. Objects that are close move fast. So you see, basically, not the object. You don't care what this is. You don't care that this is some kind of object, a stone, a rat, a fish. You don't care about that. All you care is that this object moves here in a certain speed relative to where how the fly sees it. Now, what you can deduce from that image is very obvious. There's a ground, and the fly moves over it, and the angle of the arrows tell you roughly how fast the fly is moving. Now, the sky is clearly far away, so there's no visible movement there. That is basically telling the fly there's nothing above me. If the fly was moving in a tunnel, then the fly would see flow on the bottom, flow on the walls, flow above it. Would see all these flows, and if one of them would be larger than the others, so the arrows would be bigger, it means it's closer to the ceiling than to the bottom. So it will go down to get away from the ceiling. If there is an obstacle to the left, it will see a flow here. It will move away from the obstacle. And in fact, the guys Neumann and Bulthoff, they had made a simulation of a fly, or actually a bee-type agent flying through a world, seeing flow on the left side, and then the object would go away to make the flow small. Flow on the right side would go to the left to get away from the obstacle, and it would really look like a bee flying through a room. So, just by looking at the flow, you can say there's an obstacle, it moves, and so on, and you can get away just by making the flow smaller. Now this is cool. I will explain in a second why it's so cool. But let me mention one more thing. Here you see one other thing. The fly is now turning. Now when it turns, then this whole flow goes in this direction. It looks exactly completely different from this. It looks completely different, so the fly can distinguish whether it turns or it moves straight forward. The flow is everything the fly needs to know to navigate. In fact, we can do better than that. This is how the fly lands. So there's this fly, and it's flying high up along this axis, and from the fly's point of view, this point, this marker, appears at a certain angle. When the fly moves to here, it appears at a different angle. So the fly sees this marker moving. Now the point is, if the fly flies a bit lower, and we see the same angular change, it means the fly has moved less. And if the fly is closer to the ground, the marker moves even less. What it means is, the fly doesn't know how far it is away from the ground. All it sees is how fast the marker moves relative to each field. But if it's further up, it's faster. If it's further down, it's slower. And that's how the fly lands. Because all the fly needs to do to land is to beat the wings less strongly and go closer down to the ground and just keep the optical flow constant. Because that means that it becomes slower and slower automatically. It doesn't have to do anything else. So to land, what a fly does, it beats the wings less, and it basically keeps the optical flow constant. Then it becomes slower as it comes to the ground. Almost magic. What I want to emphasize here is, with the same device, optical flow, the fly can avoid obstacles, land, find out how the structure of the world is. There's a ground, no ground. There's a ceiling, no ceiling. It's a free field, it's rotating. All the things come out automatically. There's not much to do. And we have a minimal design. There's not much to be designed here. It's really simple. Optical flow is all across animal kingdom. Even mammals have it a bit, but they are not very good at it. Humans are much better at recognizing objects than optical flow. Insects are good at optical flow because they don't have a big brain to do more than that. Simple and uniform, so it looks the same everywhere. You don't have to invent anything to recognize objects. Plus, don't forget one thing, that recognizing objects is very expensive and it's slow. This is very fast. And a fly needs only 300,000 neurons. I guess that a modern iPhone has more transistors than a fly has a brain cells. 300,000 neurons is not a lot. It has a simple worldview, but it is really cut down to the essentials, and it does it very well. So the fly eye realized a simple and cheap solution. Well, I'm lying to you. It's not cheap. It's not cheap. Let's have a look. The fly eye uses roughly 10 to 20% of the whole metabolic energy of the fly. So that's a tax of around 10 to 20% for the eyes only. That's a lot. That's a lot of tax just for the eyes. We're not talking about everything else. Not the wings, okay? It's just the eyes. And the humans, when they are resting, so they are just watching TV or something, not thinking too much, pay that tax too. When you start thinking, hopefully when you're listening to me, you go up to the upper tax bracket of 40 to 50%. Brain. The brain weighs only 6% of the human body. So in other words, the brain eats up a major part of your energy. There is this Garfield cartoon where this Garfield cat, which is really lazy, doesn't want to do anything, and is being told half of exercise, of physical exercise, is mental. So he sits in the bed and dreams about, pant, but doesn't do anything. I'll do the physical part another time. 50% already covered. So what lesson have we learned? We have learned the following lesson, that the fly eye is essentially the brain of the fly, more or less. It's not entirely true. There are 300,000 neurons that do also other things, but there is actually also a bottleneck between the fly eye and the fly brain, and that bottleneck is known to have, I don't know the exact number, but it's not a lot, roughly 10 to 20 neurons. 10 to 20 neurons is all the fly actually sends from the eye to its brain. Wow, that is interesting. Okay. Well, we are in the university, so it behooves us to talk a little bit of Latin. Natura non facit expensum sine necessitate. The nature doesn't make any expenses without necessity. So if it pays 20%, it must get something for it. So whatever the fly eye does, it must be important. We know, and now I'm using it in an informal way, but it will be formal in a second. Fly eye acquires information about the environment. Information is to know what happens in the environment, and the interesting trick is here, it makes it directly usable. So if you see, for example, you want to land, all you need to know is the optical flow. Once you have it, you can straight use it for landing. You don't have to recompute it, adapt it, modify, do complicated calculations like you have if you do a moon landing exercise. It just happens straight out of the box. There are few changes you need to do to it to actually use it for basically using it as an action sequence. So let us consider very briefly alternatives for evolution. We have been talking about sensors. So the fly had these fantastic sensors. What about actuators? Why not evolve better actuators, right? So for example, you are this antelope. You are grazing in the savannah. It's a hot day, hot and humid like here. You're grazing there and suddenly there's a lion 5 meters away from you because you didn't notice it. You have no sensors to notice it, but you have very fast actuators to run away. Great, you have to run away very fast. You should not stumble. And you have to be holding off this lion for a long time before it gets tired and leaves you alone. What was not a good strategy, okay? You can do that. Yeah, maybe you're strong and powerful like an elephant, then you don't have to worry about lions anyway. But generally, you need actuators that have to be super fast, super strong if you don't want to spend your effort on sensors. But imagine the same antelope is there, smells, there's a lion, sees, there's a lion over there 1 mile away. You know what? Let's trot away. Let's just go away, slowly. It's much safer, quiet, less risk. Having good sensors saves you a lot of energy, right? So you can trade in sensors for actuators. If you have, big muscles, you don't have to be sensitive. Yeah, just move things aside, right? Lots of movies that make jokes out of it. But if you have sensors, you can avoid the trouble right away. Of course, it requires some kind of processing power. So running actuators is extremely expensive. I would like to emphasize that actuators are a really nasty thing because muscles, their power grows with the area, but their energy consumption grows with the volume. So in other words, the energy consumption grows faster than the power that they exert. At some point, you have a trade-off, and it's not good enough. If you have a brontosaurus, a really big dinosaur, they were spending most of their time in water because they couldn't sustain themselves on land. All right? So we have to take that into account. And that's why sensors evolved in many fashions. I just mentioned a few. Olfaction, auditive, sonar, electrical sense, they're all fantastic. I can give you a really cool story about each of them. But I wanted to focus a little bit more on photoreceptive senses because they are actually quite interesting. Photoreceptors, or for lack of other words, eyes, appear in 40 to 60 lines of descent. And it's believed that there are probably 4 or 5 lines where they really appear independently of each other. So in other words, nature has rediscovered them over and over. It's very lucky that they didn't patent it, the first lines. Yeah, patent for 20 billion years. Wouldn't be good, right? So there are really a lot of lines of descent which develop sensors like eyes independently. That's a signal. They are really important. And they are amongst the most powerful sensors because they are distant sensors, they are immediate, and they have a pretty high resolution. I mean, the fact that we can observe galaxies billions of light years away gives testament to that. Light is a really good information transmitter. But sometimes the visible light that we can use, because that's the one we get through the atmosphere, is not enough. And so, for example, bats that work mostly in the dark, they use a sonar as a replacement for light. The point is, they use a sonar not as an auditive sense, they use it actually as a visual sense. They see the world through the sonar. Basically everything they do with it is corresponding to what eyes do for us, except that it's auditive. Now, the infrared sensors of snakes, again, is a visual sense. Again, it behaves like eyes, but its hardware is entirely different. And I want to mention it very briefly because it's really fascinating to see how nature came up with that, with an entirely different way, entirely different model, entirely different patent. So nature doesn't have to pay a patent fee for that one, because that is really a different idea. So you have these pit vipers, and they have pits at the front of their head. So they have these holes in the front of their head, in the skin, and they act as heat sensors. And just to give you an idea how good they are, they can distinguish temperature differences of 3,000 degrees Celsius. If you ever try to measure temperature, you will understand how good that is. It's incredibly good. Now, how does it work? Well, this is the pit. This is basically a pit. It's like a pinhole camera. It's like a hole where light can go in this case infrared light. And say there's a mouse here. The mouse, the heat ray coming from the mouse goes through the pinhole, hits this very thin skin membrane, heats it up here. This is isolated by an air bubble, so the heat doesn't go away very fast, and heats this spot up. This spot heats up, the nerves transmit that one to the brain, and then you see, aha, the brain sees there's a heat spot at this point. That's how it works. Very simple, but it's quite different from an eye. Now, what I like to point out here is something very strange. Snakes are evolutionarily not that far away from us. They're not mammals, but they're vertebrates. They are comparatively close. And it turns out that this thing here, in this membrane, the sensors are very close to the surface. They are only 50 micrometers away, while in normal mammals, the thermal sensors are 100 micrometers away from the surface. But the hardware they are using, yeah, they bought the hardware in, I don't know, Maplin, whatever, some shop. That hardware is the same roughly as ours, because the sensitivity of the neuron, of the heat neurons, is essentially that same of the human forehead. So all that changed between us and the snakes is the arrangement of the sensor. It's anatomy. It's not a qualitative change. It's just an arrangement change. That is fascinating. It gives you an idea. And by the way, the nerves that do that are basically based on the same nerves that we have as a trigeminal nerve. So we have the same nerves. They're not just not used for anything except for transmitting information from one area to another. Okay? So what I want to show you here is that here we have an adaptation to some visual modality which works entirely different from what you usually know. I want to give a few more observations because that will compound our search for clues. Number one, sensors are highly optimized. I did not talk about that too much, and I don't have too much time about that, but I would like to mention that nature really goes to the limits when it comes to detecting stuff. So there are these famous moths. Anecdotes say that these moths, these night moths, can detect individual molecules of pheromones of a female. That is not true. At least I could not find any reliable source for that. But the best source I found was Dusenberry, and he says it's probably 200 to 300 molecules you can measure. Okay? So it's quite a high sensitivity. Still not individuals, but it's quite high. What's true, however, seems to be is that humans actually, if you lock them up in a dark room, say astronomers, lock them up in a dark room for several days, let them go out, they can actually detect clusters of 10 to 20 photons. It's pretty good. Well, there are actually toads that can detect individual photons, single light particles. Now, why is that impressive? Because these toads could really work as astronomers. Another thing that really is striking, the auditive sense, our hearing, operates at close to the thermal noise. That's as good as it gets. You cannot do better physically. It's not a choice of nature. It's not that evolution didn't exploit it more. There's no point exploiting it more. There's nothing there to exploit. And of course, when you go to the disco, it's over. But until you go to the disco, or small children, they do have this very, very fine sensitivity of hearing. But the other thing is, and that's a downside, cognitive processing is very expensive. You pay a lot for it. Neurons are expensive to maintain. So let me summarize. High investment to sensors, high variability in sensoric implementation, but the function is very similar sometimes. Sensors operate on the limit of sensitivity, and that seems to be quite consistently the case, not always, of course, but often it goes to the limit. And I didn't mention that in too detail, but neural processing capacity also seems to operate close to the limits. And neural and sensoric processing work together seamlessly. Good. So it's very clear something happens here that is of interest. And we know sensors acquire something, neurons process something. What is the something? Well, the elephant in the room, of course, is information. That is what we're going to talk about next. Information, what do I mean by information? Because not everybody knows the concept of information in detail. I'm going to explain it slightly, give you some hints. Of course, we live in an information society. You are information agents of information, generating information, reading information. I want to make it clearer what I'm going to talk about, making a slightly more precise term, and there's a precise term. Let me make a distinction between types of information. Irrelevant information. So you get this message on your phone. You have won a prize, text 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to claim. Ha ha. I'm going to do it right away. Right? So that's obviously irrelevant. Yeah, it's information, but it's irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything. Now, in more interesting cases, this one, XYZ denies charge of ABC. Well, the point is, it usually doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you whether the guy is guilty or not. Usually when you read that, it just means he has been caught by the police, and the question is he guilty or not, is not answered by that. It doesn't mean he's not guilty, it doesn't mean he is guilty. He will usually deny the charges. So that's irrelevant information. Yeah? If they say they found him with 2 bloody hands, leaning over the corpse, yes, that's information. In a crime story, of course, it's misleading information, but never mind. We're not talking about that. Right, so let's talk about relevant information. Now I have a better one. Car coming at fast speed from the left. Yeah, that's relevant. You want to know that. You really want to know that. Okay, enough said. That's a famous one, of course, Sherlock Holmes. You have not observed, and yet you have seen. So there is information there which actually is relevant to you or to whatever you want to do, but you have not identified it. It's there, you see it, your eyes see it, but you don't notice that it's there. Okay, that is very, very important one. And I have another one, very hidden relevant information. Well, That's relevant information that you would use if you knew it was there, but you can't actually see it. And I have an example for that. So this is a pretty boring yellow flower, Potentilla anserina, another Latin word. This is how it looks for humans, quite boring, uninteresting. But if you are a bee, then you have UV eyes. If you have UV eyes, ultraviolet capable eyes, then it looks a bit different. That's how it looks. And it's clearly a bit more interesting. It's patterned, and as I mentioned, bees can recognize and remember patterns. So for a bee, a pattern is a good thing. Why is it a good thing? Because when they memorize a pattern, they know how to land on the flower. That's why they memorize them. They try to stick to the same flower all the time because that makes it faster for them to collect the food. Actually, bees are pretty good at maintaining task focus. They don't multitask. They don't change from flower to flower usually of different species. They like to stay with the same species because it's more efficient. Okay, so let's go to a measured movement, measuring information. How do you measure information? Some of you may know this, but I have to say it for everybody so that everybody can follow to what I want to say. So we'll do a little exercise. You come into a restaurant. Do you want to have your fish with chips or rice? Chips. Okay, I would have chosen chips too. But essentially, they don't know whether you chose chips or rice. And if you have two equivalent choices, they are completely equivalent, we say it is a decision of 1 bit. You told them 1 bit. Of course, if they know me, they know that I will never choose rice. I never choose rice. I always like chips. In that case, it's 0 bit. There's no decision to be made. They will just serve me chips. Always. Okay. I have another one. Okay, that's me. Greek or Caesar salad? Caesar. Okay, 1 bit again. No surprises here. And now if you travel to the US, then the following can happen. You can choose between the following dressings. Thousand Islands, blue cheese, ranch dressing, New York style dressing, Italian dressing, French dressing, vinegar and oil dressing, olive oil dressing. Oh, and they really like that. Excuse me? Can you be a bit slower? Thousand Islands. Okay, Thousand Islands. That's what I usually do. So my question is now, how many decisions are here? Of course, we could say to everything yes or no. Thousand Islands, no. Blue cheese, no. Ranch dressing, no. New style, yes. And so on, so on, so on. We could do that. Turns out it's wasteful. You can do that, but it's really not the best way to do that. The better way to do it is the following. If you want to minimize the number of yes-no answers you have to give, the first question could be, do you prefer an American style dressing or a Mediterranean style dressing? I say Mediterranean style. Then we can exclude these. It will be somewhere here. And the next question will be, do you prefer an oil-based dressing or the ones named after a country? I say, well, one named after a country. Okay. And now you can ask this third question, Italian or French? Well, say French. So you have asked 3 questions, and after 3 questions, you know the choice. So there are 3 bits hidden here. The 3 questions means 3 bits, 3 yes-no decisions. Not 8 bits, but 3 bits. Okay. If you want to know how to do that in general, it's always like that, essentially. I give you a very small, simple recipe. You have a number of equivalent options, so they have no idea that you have a preference. If that's the case, you take the number of options, in this case 8, divide by 2, then you have 4. That was our Mediterranean choice. Then, that's the first question. The second question divides by 2 again. Second question. The third question divides by 2 again. You have 1 choice left. Third question. 3 questions, and you got down to 1 unit. That's how many bits it costs you to make the decision. So you divide until you get 1 or less. Then you know the number of bits. That's the best you can do if all choices are equivalent. Now, some of you will know that this is really easy. But the point is there's a whole theory behind that, because if it's not equally chosen, if you have different types of structures, if you have to transmit this information different way, it's a really complete theory. And Shannon, 1948, 1949, wrote two absolutely important papers on the theory of information. And I used to say there are three major discoveries in the 20th century. The first is, of course, relativity theory. The second is theory of quantum theory. And the third, in my opinion, is the theory of information. In fact, the first two can be subsumed as theory of relativity is the theory that tells you how fast information can move. Theory of quantum tells you how much information is there in a physical system. Essentially, you can express all of them as information theories. So I would like, however, to interpret it not as a theory of communication as Shannon did, but as a theory of decision. If I make a decision, I need to know something, even if it's just my own opinion. So the decision cost is going to be the number of equivalent yes-no questions I need to answer, and I want to know the cost of the perfect decision. So the decision that really gets me what I want, no mistakes. That's the cost I want to know. I now, however, want to say, well, life is not always perfect. A fly is not always perfect. A human is not always perfect. Well, some may be, but usually they're not. Henry VIII got rid of one of the perfect ones. You know, the Pope. The Pope is perfect. You know that there's a doctrine of he never makes mistakes. So that's a special case. But generally, you are looking at imperfect decisions. Imperfect decisions means that you have to ask, what do you do in this case? But even imperfect decisions have a way of being treated perfectly. And this quote is, I just found it yesterday, and I thought this was just the quote I needed here. So a quiz show. There's a quiz show. You are in front of two doors. They look exactly the same. And behind one door, there's £1 million. It's not as much as it used to be, but still a lot of money. Behind the other door, there's nothing. Okay, which door to choose? It's very clear there are two doors. They're equivalent choices. So knowing the right door is worth 1 bit and £1 million. You really want to know that 1 bit, right? So it's worthwhile taking the quizmaster out for a dinner and talking to him, asking him where is the prize going to be at the end. Yeah, that's really 1 bit. You want a perfect answer. You don't want him to mess with you. Case 2. There are two doors. £1 million behind one, £1 million behind the other. How much do you need to know? Not a lot. Not a lot. Nothing, actually. You don't care. You pick a door, you're fine. You don't make a decision, actually. Doesn't matter. Just open the door. And in fact, that's 0 bit. You don't have to make a decision. That's easy. Now comes the interesting one. Case 3, two doors, 1 million behind the one, 999,000 behind the other. How much? I like the way you think. Yes, it depends on how greedy you are. Very good. Very good. Now, let's put it this way. Assume that you want to take the quizmaster out for dinner. But the point is here, of course, it's risky. Yeah, you don't want to be seen. You don't want to be caught. It's a risk you take. For this bit, perhaps you will take this risk. Question is, will you take it for this one? Probably not. Probably you say, 999,000 is fine for me. But the problem here is, assuming, and now I make it a bit more plausible than the greediness, assuming that there was another quiz candidate that did 999,500. And you can beat him in history, being the best candidate. So the point is not about the 1,000 different here. The point is about beating the other guy. Suddenly it's important. All right? So in this case, it really depends. Does the absolute value of the money matter to you? Probably then you don't care. If, however, you can, say, make some other thing, do some other step, then this 1 bit can be really important for you. So I would say, in this case, you probably would say 0 bit, but it really depends on the situation. Okay? So this is the case of the imperfect decision, where you can or cannot live with an imperfect decision depending on the situation. So I would like to emphasize here, we're not interested in information per se, but in relevant information. Information pertaining to choice of actions. Left door, right door. Actions have an effect. Something happens, you get money or you survive or whatever. The effect determines the success of the organism. That is what you're interested in, ultimately. Now, I want to mention to those of you who know the traditional theory of information, those who don't can just shut off for 5 seconds until I make this statement, and then you can turn on again. Traditional information theory talks only about faithfulness of data. It says, if I send you 1 gigabyte of spam, all they care about that this spam will really arrive as it was sent. Doesn't matter that it's unimportant to you. Okay? That is what traditional information theory does. But in living organisms, relevance will matter. For living organisms, they really want to distinguish this information is important for me or it's not. So what we actually find out, and I have to skip here a lot of more intricate things, is that when we have information that gives you a balance sheet, bits, but these bits are invariants. And they're the precise measure for the cost of a decision in the task at a certain level. I want 1 million, I need the bit. I don't want 1 million, I can do with less, I need less than a bit of information. And this is universal currency. So in other words, wherever you have decisions in your brain, in your system, in your organism, you can convert this decision, essentially you can exchange it for some other information in a way. Yeah? So it's basically measured in the same way. It's compatible all over the system. Now I want to make a little statement, which essentially those of you who know a little bit of physics will find interesting. In physics, there are important invariants. One important invariant is energy. Energy cannot be created, energy cannot be destroyed. So if you have a system and you make a process, energy is conserved. Matter in classical physics is also conserved. And when you do relativistic physics, then matter and energy are together and mixed together, but that doesn't matter. This is an invariant. In information theory, in cognition, we have similar type of invariants. We can look at the minimum information as an invariant of the task. For example, if I want to run away from this hall through that door, I need to find that door. I need to get there. I need to make decisions with my legs. I have to turn to the right and start moving in a particular way. This is a bit too easy. Let's put some obstacles in my way so it gets a bit more expensive, right? So I'm here, I want to get, I have to move around, I have to make this decision. This requires a number of decisions. As we mentioned, decisions cost information. Now I can do the following. I'm standing here, I want to get to the door. I have a choice how I'm doing that. I see the door, I look at the door, take it in, remember, close the eyes. And now I'm, from memory, have to find the way there. I'm not going really to do that. Actually, that was good. I thought I was bumping the chairs. So I basically took in the information, stored it in my memory, and then acted like it was pre-recorded. Or I can do the following. I look at the door, that's where it is. I roughly go there. That's where it is. I roughly go there. That's where it is. I roughly go there. Every bit I take a little bit of information and correct a little bit. So I have the choice whether I take in all the information at once and spend it basically over the time, or whether I take it in bit by bit and then produce immediate reaction to that. Of course, the second one is easier. Why? Because I don't have to remember everything. The first one is a bit like shooting a bullet to the moon and hoping it will land at the right spot. It is possible, but it's hard. Because you really have to put all the information right away. You can't correct later on. But if you can correct later on, you can basically use the information all over the time and spread it like butter on a bread. How much time do I have left? 30 minutes. Okay. So what I'd like you to understand here is invariants of information. A task defines an invariant amount of information your agent needs to process. But I can't spread it over time. I can't spread it over environment. You do that all the time. Do you write? Yes? You're able to write? Some of you use iPhones. They forget writing. If you write, you use the environment to store information. You put it there, and then you get it when you want it again. Yeah, some people put knots into their handkerchief. You can use sensors or memory. That's really interesting. You find that, for example, many people now look up things that they used to remember. I used to be very good with phone numbers. I was so good with phone numbers that, in fact, I sometimes rang numbers of people who long changed their phones. And I still rang them. And, oh, sorry, wrong number. It was the right number, but the wrong person. Sorry. So that was memory. But today, you don't use it anymore. You use your sensors. I look at the number. Oh, that's the way it is. It's written down on your phone. So you can shift it around. That's possible. And the cool thing about that is that it means that we don't care, like in physics, we don't care where the energy is. We don't care where it's spread over. We don't care where it's put. It's always an invariant. And invariants are incredibly useful for making science, for being able to make a scientific statement. But of course, organisms are lazy. Basically, organisms are fundamentally lazy. If you want to do maximum performance, you want to be as good as you possibly can. You want to play chess as Kasparov. You want to run as fast as Usain Bolt or somebody else. You want to be at highest performance level. There. This point requires the most cognitive burden. You have to really pay attention to how you run, where you step, how you walk, what you do, how you train, what you eat, how long you sleep, blah, 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 whatever. But the cognitive burden, the decision-making, must not make any mistakes. If you play chess against a really strong chess player, you have to pay attention. If you play chess against a toddler, well, unless the toddler is Bobby Fischer, you probably don't have to pay attention. Okay? The toddler is Bobby Fischer, that's a different story, of course. But you will make the mistake only once. So, this is the perfection, up there. However, let me make another statement. If I live with that performance, I can live with a performance here. Say I don't have to be perfect. You know, I want to just play for fun a bit, but I want to beat the guys in my club. I'm still in this performance, and everything in the gray area is possible. So everything here is allowed. However, everything in the white area is not. White area is forbidden territory. Forbidden means because you cannot reach that. You cannot have the performance at this level for less than this cognitive burden. It's not a lot, but still you have to think a little bit. Yeah? You can have 3 pints, but not 4 pints. Basically. So this is a allowed area. And if you look at a certain performance, I basically ask, okay, what's the least cognitive burden I can get away with and still keep the performance? And you can calculate this curve. So this curve tells you the trade-off. If I become better, then I need a more minimum cognitive burden. And if I want to be really good, I have to really spend a lot of effort for that, for this last bit. Now, if you are an organism in this territory, it's very clear that there are two counteracting phenomena here. The one is efficiency. An organism, say, that spends a lot of energy on thinking, and all it's doing is just it's very clear that's investing into cognitive information. So evolution will most likely push its efficiency down here. Higher efficiency means it will use less brain for the same task. If you have fish, there are fish that live in caves, they don't have eyes. Actually, they do have eyes, they just don't work. And the point is that nature will immediately say, okay, you're not needing, and shut them down. In fact, that's what happens to astronauts in space. Astronauts in space basically lose the function of their muscles. Their muscles, they degenerate very, very quickly. Nature understands, oh, you don't need them. Okay, let's just run them down. That's what it does. It's very efficient. But I'm talking also about evolutionary scale. So efficiency goes up as you go here because you do the same with less sensory burden. On the other hand, there's this one, effectiveness. I have information, I have a cognitive power. It's a bit like having, you know, you have this big supercomputer. You bought this, you had this big fund, like the European Union got 1 billion euros for the brain research, right? You got this billion euros, now what do you do with that? You can't just shut it down. You have that, so let's make something with that. And effectiveness means that your actions become increasingly utilizing the available cognitive power. You have this cognitive power, well, let's use it, and so you try to get to higher and higher performances. These two are pressures that essentially go into opposite directions. Not exactly opposite, they're not antagonistic, but the point is, once you land here on the curve, there's no reason for you to move any further. You stick there, you're optimal, please don't bother me anymore. Yeah, we can't go effective because if you try to improve the effectiveness, efficiency will suffer. If you try to improve the efficiency, effectiveness will suffer. None of the both of the natural drives of evolution or adaptation will win here. I'll come to that in a second. But before I do that, I would like also to point out one more thing. Note that I say this is the perfect solution, but if you can live with a slight imperfection, you land here. So essentially you don't lose much, you almost lose nothing and use half of the cognitive burden. So that's a pretty good trade-off. So you have to ask yourself, where do you want to sit in this curve? Right, so let me come back again. You want to be parsimonious or economical with information. Economical means you want to be as efficient as possible for a performance level. You want to be as effective as possible for an available cognitive level. And you have these two forces. And now, turns out, that's where you have economy, there you have opportunity. If you have an arms race between making actuators more effective, making sensors more parsimonious, then when you get stuck in the niche, how can you get out of it? And the one thing that we discovered, and that is really Oscar Wilde. I mean, you can't go without quoting him. He just has the right quotes for every opportunity. It is a very sad thing that nowadays there is so little useless information. How true. In fact, sometimes it's a good thing, because it turns out that in the process of getting the relevant information out of the system, there is an unavoidable component of what I like to call piggyback information. So, what is piggyback information? Say you order, we just ordered something from an electronic shop, and it came in this huge carton, and there was just something really small. So you can't avoid getting this big baggage of stuff to get your small, fragile entity. Similar to that, there's a phenomenon. It really is a mathematical phenomenon. It's not physics, it's not biology, it's mathematics. That when you try to extract relevant information from an environment, that relevant information often comes packed in to a big fluff of what we call piggyback information. Sander actually prefers, the student who developed that model, prefers the term concomitant information, but I find it sounds so boring. So, piggyback information means it's information that comes, if you want that amount of relevant information, it always comes with it. You cannot avoid it. So you need to process it, and then you throw it away. Right. Bingo. What happens now is, of course, when you have this information, well, why not use it? Why not do something with it? Why not see whether this information tells me something more? And in fact, Sander's model shows that, yes, you can actually discover other tasks, other opportunities to make utility, which are different from the original. Now, the cool thing about that, you must imagine this is like oiling a motor, right? It's stuck somewhere, then you oil it, and suddenly it can move somewhere else to some other position. That's what it does. So this piggyback information gives you leeway to move around in this evolutionary space from one niche to another, a lateral movement. This is a mathematical phenomenon, and we predict that, or the prediction or the hypothesis of that paper is that it actually may underlie the fact that organisms actually can do that. They can actually move from niche to niche. And there's another effect which we hypothesize is that this very similar effect can drive sensory evolution to the limit, no matter whether you actually needed it in the first place. So in other words, evolution may not directly see that you need the highest resolution of your sensors, but concomitant or piggyback information actually may drive you go there just because you can, essentially. So it's like having, oh, I have this new phone, and then I have to put in everything I can do just because it's possible. It's not a very high cost to do that at that point. It's just easy. And so I would like to argue that information processing, evolution of information processing can open up evolutionary pathways. There's also a more negative way of saying that, neurocracy. And the statement that is behind that is higher forms of life are nothing but bureaucracy imposed on bacteria. Basically, you have lots of bacteria and you tell them, okay, that's how you talk together, that's how you work together, that's the forms you fill, that's the tick boxes you tick, and then you get higher forms of life. So that's us. Well. But the message is here that you can actually have this parasitic processes over the original information processing extraction which drive your evolution. Now I want to go to another thing and show you a few examples of actually how you can actually model with the help of information. This example is by Christoph Salge, who's actually sitting there in the audience. Yes, there. The guy who waves. Yeah. And it's about the concept of digested information. Now we have been talking about food, so this is a good time for that. What's digested information? So imagine, this is a real story. I was in Edinburgh with a friend for a conference. It was evening, we were looking for a nice place to go, a nice club or something. And of course we don't know Edinburgh, so what to do? So this guy, he's quite an inventive guy. He said, well, look at this young ladies, they're going there, let's follow them. I say, well, are we stalkers or what? And he says, no, they know where to go. And indeed, they knew. So we followed them, they entered this club, we thought, okay, that looks good. We went in, and in fact, it was a very good club. So why is it an interesting story? Because we talked about relevant information. Information is relevant to you. For example, food, where's a club, where's this, where's that, but sometimes you don't have access to it. You can't see it, your sensors don't see it, your memory doesn't allow you to combine it, you don't have it. But somebody else has it. Turns out that other agents are much denser sources of information than the environment. You know, I can talk to this cup and say, can you please tell me the closest way to the station? That's good, I can talk to it, it will not answer. Most likely not. Actually, wait, no. It doesn't. But some people actually read from tea cups or coffee cups. I can't. So the point is, but if you talk to an agent or you look at an agent, they tell you a lot because their movement is condensed information. They already extracted the relevant information and brought it to fruition in a decision. They make a decision. They go here, they go there, and whatever. Now, if you assume that the agents have a similar goal as you, like these young ladies were well dressed, and so you knew they were looking for a place to go. It was an assumption that they would probably look for a place that would be suitable for us too. And then all we need to do is just observe what they're doing. Just observation. And essentially, this is what this example is about. This is called digested information because it's information that has been already processed by somebody else. And here the example is a number of agents that look for food. The food is not visible throughout the world. And if an agent moves in this direction, it's likely that he didn't see food there. When he sees food, they stop and disappear from the game. But that's all we are looking at. We are now looking at what it does. And if you don't see food as an agent, you just go where you think it may still be. You've covered areas, you don't know where it is, so it's still not around. But if you see another agent coming from there, you know the food is probably not there. And you can probably join it in the same direction. Okay, now let's run this example and how it looks. So this takes now half an hour to start up, but it will start up eventually. Okay, these tails are actually what the agent did. They are not real tails. They have no function in the simulation. They only show you what the agent did in the last steps, and you see these agents stopping actually found the food. This is the food piece, and it gets moves around, and they basically get taken out of the simulation so they don't disrupt the others. Because once an agent stops, you see it stopped, you know where the food is, so it's boring. And you find that these agents all follow each other more or less. They swarm nicely in groups. Now, one thing I'd like to mention here, number one, that the agents help each other finding the food this way. Number two, the second thing that they do is, of course, what they do is a behavior that's very similar to what was discovered in the 80s as Reynolds rules for swarming. And many people have tried to give it very complicated evolutionary reasons to avoid prey, predators, to all kinds of behaviors, how this swarming emerged. There were quite complicated, the explanations. The explanation here is much simpler. The explanation that Christoph found is, or seems to support, is, well, you're looking for food, and this guy knows where it is. That's all. And that gives you already quite a strong swarming behavior. Of course, this is something we will investigate further, but it's very clear that just information alone gives you swarming behavior, and everything else like predator-prey avoidance and all these extra features can then, of course, come up and be relevant to that. Okay, so this is one example. I have now another example which is slightly more complex. Swarms are great, a bit like demonstrations, spontaneous demonstrations of flash mobs. Agents meet each other, do something together, then they leave. But in real life also needs a bit more structured scenarios. More structured scenarios, for example, the formation of brains. The formation of neurons, when you have a fetus developing its neurons, adapting them so that your visual field has a proper structure, that is something that requires organization. Organization that's stronger than just swarm formation. And so we have this example, and Lars Olsson did that one, and he had this fantastic quote from Franz Kafka. This quote is still the original. Awaking one day from inquiet dreams, Gregor Samsa found himself transformed into a monstrous insect. Poor guy. But the thing that intrigued him was, okay, this guy wakes up and suddenly has eyes which look entirely different than his former eyes. They are wired in an entirely different way. Can this guy still make a sense of his environment? Somehow, magically. Now we changed that to an IBO. So this is a monstrous IBO, 3 meters big. Yeah, that's 3 meters up, 5 meters long. Just kidding. This is a book. The book is that big, okay? So don't worry. It's just that size. And basically you imagine you wake up as an IBO and your brain is not wired to identify which node, which pixel in your camera is actually on the left, on the right, in the middle, and so on. You don't know that. So more precisely, let's look at this. So this is the camera pixels. This is the order of them. We scramble the connections somehow randomly, but in a fixed way. So they are set for once. They're not changed, but you don't know what it is. And I want to show 3 little demos. Namely reorganization, integration, and degeneration. So this is the first demo. Here we're going to show the real picture that the camera sees. Here the picture of the scrambled IBO that the brain actually gained, and here the picture of how it looks like when it's being reconstructed by saying 2 pixels in the camera, when they are very similar in terms of information, we talk about information, then they are put together. If they are dissimilar, I don't care. They're put together when they're similar, they are left alone when they're not. So those who are more similar are put closer together, and see that this is the real picture, and this one looks more or less like it. It's not exact, but you see that joint groups of pixels are joint groups of pixels. Here, a dark spot here is a dark spot here. And one difference, one really striking difference is, of course, up and down is different from here. The middle one has no idea what's up and down because there's no way for the poor rewired eye to guess what's up and down. There's nothing that tells us this is up and this is down. You have to somehow give this extra information somewhere. We didn't do that. So it gets the orientation and the orientation wrong, but the neighborhood of the pixels, it gets right. Okay. So this is another one. This is another example for a very similar simulation where we actually look. Again, all sensors of an eyeball, so this robot has visual field, but also sensors in the knees, in the legs, in the arms, and how they organize when this robot moves by putting two pixels or two sensors close together when they have similar information and far away when they're not. And you see very clearly this is a visual field, it's quite big. It's as big as the fly eye, if you may excuse this. And here the right leg, here's the left leg, and here's some sensors that don't get activated at all. And it's very clear that the thing has a bilateral symmetry. If you don't know that it's an eyeball, you know that whatever is there has probably visual field and a bilateral symmetry, so a dual symmetry, left and right side, even if you don't know anything about this organism. Okay, so that is this. And this is a very nasty experiment we did to the eyeball. Unfortunately, some people actually did that to cats. We only did it to a robot. So don't beat me up for that. But it probably in 50 years it will go down as cruelty to robots. The experiment is the following. You put the eyeball in a world where there are only vertical bars. And what we'll see is that the visual field degenerates. So this is actually the camera. And now we put in vertical bars so the poor guy can never see a horizontal distinction. And you see that it groups the neurons together in groups. But here there are big gaps, which means they have no relation to each other. That's bad. And in fact, the cats have been put in such a situation. They were not able to reconstruct a world with horizontal bars later on. But for the eyeball, fortunately, it's a robot, so we could later, after the experiment proceeded, put it in a world where there were actually both horizontal and vertical bars, or more structured. And you see, when we do that, that it suddenly reorganizes itself in a nice square grid as it was before. So you can actually reinstate the original order, which is nice to see. Again, the neighborhood is via information. How much more time? 10 minutes? Okay. Then I will come to a concluding section, and I hope it will, I have a few more movies to show. A concept called empowerment. Very quickly, what are we interested in? Again, what information, currency of life. I try to make clear that information is really important for sensors. It's really powerful. It gets you some evolution, evolutionary advantages. But I want to make a point that evolution, why should evolution actually know how to proceed? Because evolution, if we believe naive Darwinism, is just a random walk through space of genes. Well, sure. Well, we know the success criterion is survival, so it's not a random walk, it's a random walk with a cutoff. But I want to make a point that if you have, for example, an organism, and it does all these really complicated things that an organism does, the search space is very, very large for a full-fledged success feedback. So feedback by death is not a very good type of feedback for poor organisms. I'll give an example from university. So you have a student. He studies some topic and does not get any feedback. So he just studies. He goes to lectures, learns this, 3 years, final exam, fail. Is that good feedback? Probably would fail your SFQ feedback forms. It's not very helpful. A fail is not very informative. A fail at the end is certainly not very informative. Because you have no idea what you did wrong and what you did right. Even if you do everything right and then you do some stupid mistake in your exam, goodbye. That's not helpful. The question is, can we do it better? Well, nature has, of course, a way of doing better. It has homeostasis. Tells you you're hungry. Okay, you need to up your blood sugar level. You have to eat something. You're thirsty. You need to put in more water. Fine, that is all there. But these are very old, very special properties that are universal throughout organisms, but many properties are not universal. Bats have, you know, other needs than mice. Bats have to fly. They don't want to crash to the ground. Mice have to be careful that, I don't know, they don't eat too many poisons when they're running around. Flies, again, have to be careful about other things. So every organism has a case-by-case necessity for certain properties. And this is really a problem, because how do you get that done right for every organism? Okay, you have lots of organisms. Evolution can play around with lots of organisms, but still, even if you have 1 trillion bacteria, the space of genetic sequences is massive. So can you do better than that? Well, the idea is that feedback should be dense and rich. Dense means you get feedback all the time. Rich means that ideally this feedback should tell you what is the right thing to do. Okay? So basically, like you're driving a car, and you should basically, no, yes, right, no, more to the left, more to the right. Well, probably you don't want a co-driver like that, but in principle, that's what you want for organisms. You want to know whether you're roughly on the right track. And notice, you have that. When you go on a slippery slope, even if you have never been to a slippery slope, you immediately feel that's not good. Let's get off here. Because what happens is you lose control. You find that things you are relying upon don't work anymore. And so there are many ways of doing that. I just mentioned them. I don't have the time to go through them. But there's a big and active field of research, right, the last 10 years essentially. And the one I would like to mention is one that measures the informational fit into the sensory motor niche. So if I have a fish that lives in the cave, and this fish can, you know, flap, create movements to scare other fish, and then can see them, at least if there was light. But there is no light. Then it's a bad fit. There's no point. Yeah? If you live in the dark, then you have either to work as an auditive sense, like the bat, create noise, create signals, so that they can get the reflection from the object, the target object, or you do it like deep sea fish. They create their own light. They create their own light, then they can see. So the niche has to fit. Whatever you do has to fit what you see. What you can do, if it doesn't matter, it doesn't count. So what we are saying is we're maximizing the potential that you can inject information to the environment. So if I'm moving something, I'm changing the environment, I'm making a decision, I'm imposing information on the environment, and I can see it. If I have this button, I press this button, and somewhere on an asteroid explodes a huge bomb, and we don't know it, it doesn't count. That's why little children love to press buttons. You see, little children we don't come from the jungle. In jungle, there are no buttons. Why do little children press buttons? Because the light goes on, the music goes on, the parents get angry. There's an effect. Yes, that is what they want, an effect. So, injecting information in the environment and getting a response. So, the motto Tobias has formulated really nicely: being in control of one's destiny is a good thing. It's not enough to be in control of one's destiny, you also have to know it. And that's why we call it empowerment, because that's a term from social sciences where that basically says you are in control and you are aware that you are in control. We use the same term for a precise information theoretic notion, and it works really nicely. I want a little example before I show the movie. Assume you have a robot, and this robot is in the room. And the robot, for example, wants to be empowered, and being empowered means he wants to have lots of freedom of movement. Yeah, I can move. It doesn't mean it has to move. It can move. So I will place myself here, or here, or here, but probably will not stuck in this corner. That's uncomfortable. It's like flying Ryanair or something. You know, that's... Yeah, there's one in the Hannibal Lecter books. There's one scene where Hannibal sits in a plane, and there's a sentence: after so many years in solitary confinement, Hannibal does not like to fly in a confinement. Yeah, so we can understand him. Yeah, perfect. The only thing that missing in these airplanes is a mask. Anyway, so being in control means you have the space. But the other thing you can do is put a ball in the room. If the robot sees the ball, or this agent sees the ball, the organism sees the ball, it cannot just control himself, it can also control the ball. So it increases the number of control degrees by a lot. Controlling the ball is interesting because it gives you more power, more options than being just a solitary robot without nothing. That's why we like to play around with stuff. That's why people like iPhones, because with very little button pressing, they have a lot of control. That is the hypothesis that we have here. So I have an example, and that is a relatively recent example, well, very recent example, by Christoph Salge again, where we have a robot building a blocks world to maximize its empowerment. So what does it do? It can move around, it can climb on blocks, it can move blocks to a certain position, take a block, pick it up, and place it somewhere else. And all it's doing, we have here two versions of the robot, one that just does random movements. So it basically doesn't do anything, it's just drunk and does stuff. And this one tries to maximize its empowerment. You see that this robot has some kind of building streak. And Christoph actually says that this was inspired by Minecraft. You can imagine, Minecraft is really, people are playing with it, but why waste people's time? You can waste robots' time. Make them play Minecraft, yeah? Keep them busy. So the message is that you can make them, well, I don't like the word creative here, but you can make the robot do things that are kind of look sensible, or like building an ant hill or something like that. It's a very similar process. And finally, at the end of my talk, I'm coming to an example which I like to show, which Philippe Capdepuis managed to get to work. It's quite a tricky thing. It ran for weeks. It's really, really expensive computation. Basically, what he did, it took a lot of little agents. Every agent had a density sensor, one in the north, east, south, and west, looking for other agents locally. So is there somebody beside me? And how much? How many? And maximizing its empowerment. What does it mean? It means that if it's an empty space, he doesn't like it. He doesn't like to be in an empty space. And he doesn't like to be confined either, squeezed between the others. Oxford Street. What you want is being company of others, but not squeezed in. It's like the optimal club density. Yeah. So if it's too full, it's not fun. If it's too empty, it's not fun. It has the right level. And we'll see what happens. And every dark spot here is an agent. And you see the lone agent, they run around like crazy and try to find the bigger groups. And these are the bigger groups. And they have all kinds of structures they form. Now I have to mention one thing. The structures change all the time because the agent reassess every time how their movement will change, because they can't predict what will happen the next steps. They have to make some kind of guess. Is there somebody there? I don't see anybody here. Should I go here, or should I go here, or here, or here? So that's why it changes, because this assessment changes. So you can think of it like stock markets, where people keep, the analysts keep telling people all kinds of stuff every couple of weeks, and it changes every time. And so these are waves of behavior. And while this runs in the background, I thank you for your attention. I will be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Are there some questions?
Yes, you mentioned bees. I spent a bit of time watching bees, and the impression I've gained is that bee forms pattern templates which it matches.
Mm-hmm.
I had one particular case where bees were nesting in my shed. They could get in through a hole in the bottom of the door, but they couldn't get in when the door was open.
Ah,
and I'm
okay.
wondering how that kind of more complex pattern matching relates to your bit count of information.
Well, this is a very specific question which really depends on the particular niche the bees live in. So what you would say is, of course, you have to match a pattern to a behavior. And if you do that, and the patterns change, so they're not always the same patterns, it means it has a certain cost to relearn. I could imagine that you could actually, I think there's even work even in the same conference, the 2001 conference that showed the optical flow, where they actually looked at how bee models would change their tag vectors towards flowers in certain ways. I suspect that what you need is something that the bee has enough time to relearn the pattern. But I think what you have, the problem that you have, is the bee doesn't understand that the pattern of open door, closed door is essentially the same. I don't think the bee has that ability to do that. Yeah, the ability to identify that an object looks the same, it looks different, but it's the same object. It's, I think, a relatively high level ability that I doubt that insects have.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Another creature, the pit viper you mentioned. Does the pit have multiple spatial modes? Is it just a single? Does it have any angular resolution?
Yeah, there is some resolution. It's not as good as the eyes, of course, because the mechanism is quite crude, but it's there. And in fact, what's more interesting, I didn't mention that, the pits, the infrared pits, are actually wired into the optic tectum, so they're basically integrated with what the eyes see. So in other words, what the snake sees is objects in visual field, warm objects in the infrared field, and it matches them up. So it basically can have all the combination, oh, it's a warm object, it's probably a mammal, and it actually matches the object that I see here visually, or not.
You mentioned this figure for its sensitivity. Is that differential between the two senses, or is that...
I suspect it's a differential between different locations, but I'm not sure. I would have to look it up. I suspect that it's what the heat differences you can see inside one sensor. But it's just a suspicion. I would have to read it.
You mentioned insects aren't interested in objects, they're looking at optic flow. And then you showed the nice picture of the flower, and suddenly that's an object. What is that?
That's for the fly, for the bee.
For the bee. The bee
For the
is
bee.
capable of seeing optics
The
as well as optics.
Yes, yes. The fly not. The fly doesn't care. But bees are quite intelligent. You will find that solitary animals are usually less intelligent, or tend to be less intelligent than social animals. Social animals, you find amongst the same class even, they tend to be more intelligent. Probably the sociality requires a higher level of intelligence, communication, adaptation, common standards. So yeah, that's a bee.
That's uncomfortable for the couch potato.
Hmm?
That's uncomfortable for the couch potato.
Yeah, if they do that long enough. But there's Facebook, you know.
Yes, well, that just says it all.
Perhaps one more question, yes.
When you were describing how your housefly works out where it is in relation to its surroundings, I've always been mystified why the housefly doesn't, in my house, kill itself time and time again by flying straight into the window. You know, the bird outside continually makes the
Get it
mistake
in a mass.
of flying high speed into the glass without realising it's there. Obviously, its eyes are more limited, obviously, but in your description of the housefly, I couldn't see what he was using to avoid crashing at full speed.
Well, they do crash into glass. It just doesn't hurt them. I mean, the flies I have, they do crash into glass. They don't. They do it again and again until they're lucky and get out. But it may be that in the particular constellation in your house, the polarization of the light or some reflections give the fly some hint that there is something, and they avoid it. So it looks like there is something, and oh, okay, let's get out of here. And the birds, for example, they have another problem. The birds are very fast, and for them the glass is not a concept that's part of their universe. So that's why they... And by the way, I have run into glass once. So it may be actually so clean. Clean glass is dangerous. It's really dangerous. I mean, you can really hurt yourself.
It is, yes. I mean, I think you find the accident and emergency people
Okay.
have recognised the fact. And I think there is some recommendation that glass doors should have a sticker on it, a bar on
Yeah.
them, so that you can see that there's something there.
Yeah.
There's actually some work done about 5 years ago on why birds actually hit glass, and they put high-speed cameras up and found them actually breaking when they were already too close. In other words, the
Right.
distance of recognition was too short
Yes.
for their ability to break.
Yes.
And they spread their wings and tip upwards, but by then it's too late.
Yes. They're too fast.
Yes.
They're too fast.
I think there's a point in time where intelligence changes and we start looking at generalizations. Generalizations, for example, you mentioned you hit a glass pane. Now, I've seen this happen before when somebody moves the door and you've got a glass door and a window next to it, door from one side to the other, and somebody just naturally has a program inside them, a generalization, not the door's there, and bashes straight into the door. Or you could change a handle and put it on the other side of the door, and you could get confused about
Yes.
the door. I think humans generalize a lot to make life really easy, to get down to the 0 and 1 bit stage. But a lot of this is to do with the environment. What environment is the insect in, the human in, or
Yes.
whatever we're in, and then obviously then you get down to the capabilities and the behaviour as well. If you take one behaviour and put it into a different environment, different things happen. So there's a lot of variables going on, but yes, generally information, what we try and do is we be lazy, and we try and get it down to the 0 and 1 bit if we can. But
Yes.
sometimes we turn around and go, well, my generalisation say, well, it should be 0 and 1 bit, there's something else there, and that's what I want to choose.
And the classic example when you really waste a lot of information processing is video programming. Video recorders are a notorious example for bad design. Yeah, you go through a menu, the next menu, and the next menu. Every time I think it's unusable. The reason is because every step puts you in an entirely different context. Now, what's a good computer GUI? I mean, the classic example, of course, are Macs, but it's not the only ones, where everything is consistent. You find the same things more or less everywhere. And when that's not the case, you have to think. And when you have to think, it's not only bad design, it costs you more brain power. It does actually cost you more brain power. You have to think more.
It's like calling to PT.
Hmm?
It's like calling to PT.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
May I just ask one thing? That point the gentleman made about the generalization, I've empirically studied this quite a lot because I've been looking for many years at the difference between someone like a trained hunter and someone from an urban environment going into the same environment and how they behave differentially. It occurs to me that one of the factors might be the amount of noise to which you're generally subjective. And I'm wondering, the impression I get, and I'd like a refutation or confirmation if you can, that excess noise, in the broadest sense of noise, Shannon noise, actually will suppress the perception capability and make you generalize more in general. In other words, pigeonholes get more swiftly used and cruder.
You have two types of noise. Noise that's real and noise that just are things you haven't learned to resolve yet.
I'm meaning noise in the strict irrelevant sense.
Really, yeah. Then
traffic noise, petrol stink, too many people you don't know doing things you're not interested in, etc., etc.
well, mathematically, this is called a regularization process. So it means that you generalize. Of course, if there's noise, you generalize because there's not much you can do. That really happens.
My argument is really whether that causes, for the time being, a suppression of the sensory mechanisms or at least the first level processing of the sensory information. Simplification in the initial stages of processing.
I'm not sure whether it's so direct. I would not be able to answer that, but I would not be surprised if there is a mechanism that just say, okay, I'm overloaded, leave me alone. We know that we have changes in focus. We can focus on a wider area. I can look basically what everybody's doing here, and I can focus on you and forget everything that's about it. So we can do that. There are mechanisms to do that.
I think it was correct in the bits when you said there's 7 plus or minus 2. The information we can process at any one time. So there's a sort of limit.
That's been rather overdone, I think. If you actually read the original paper, it's not as cut and dried as that.
No,
Rather
I
specific.
do think that with generalizations there is a problem with overgeneralizing, and then if a new experience comes up, we try and put it into another box, and then we get a bit stuck.
My own is we try and put it into one of the existing boxes
Instead of having some
rather than a new box.
Yeah.
There are actually theorems about
Pigeons
that.
are the pigeon I first noticed.
Well, there are actually theorems about that. You can show that you have limited observations, then the optimal solution is a more general one. If you have more observations, the better solution is a more specific one. Whether a new observation now fits into the old one, that depends on the problem. And there are situations where it works, when you can seamlessly increase it. And there are situations where you have to throw away everything you know and restart from scratch. And there are mathematical ways of actually covering that information theoretically. But that would be going too far to actually explain that here.
Yeah, I might like to talk to you about it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can we all thank Daniel again?